We extend a warm welcome to you all tonight as we kick off a deep dive into the market competitiveness of Ceylon Tea. To give you a bit of context, in December of last year, the Advocata Institute launched its latest report, Market Competitiveness of the Tea Industry in Sri Lanka, authored by Sudaraka Aryaratna, a research consultant at Advocata Institute. The report is a comprehensive analysis of market competitiveness in Ceylonese tea. Beginning with an outline of the island's tea industry, it's argued here that while the industry's present standing in the international market is not altogether dire, it is issues related to the labor market, capital investment, value addition, and quality control which limit competitiveness of the industry on the global stage. Joining us all the way from Texas, where he's currently reading for a PhD in economics at Rice University, we have with us Sudaraka Aryaratna, research consultant at Advocata, to present some of the findings of the report. Having received a BA in economics from New York University, Sudaraka has conducted extensive research on both the gaming and transportation industries in addition to tea. Currently, he's working to explore the relationship between historical tea coverage and long-term gender-based economic outcomes in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Sudaraka.
Yes, I'm so sorry I couldn't be there in person today, but I hope you will bear through my quick presentation. So the first presentation is on the first and second discussion papers of the report on the factor markets of the tea industry, the land and labor resources. And what we argue in this report is that in order to increase the efficiency of the tea industry, it is important that we liberalize the land and labor resources. And this presentation will basically make the case as to why this is important. So looking at the labor resources of the tea industry of Sri Lanka, it is no secret that Sri Lanka has the highest cost of production in the world for tea production among black tea producing countries. And a lot of these costs come from the labor costs. In fact, Sri Lanka also has the highest labor costs in the world when it comes to tea production. And as you can see in this graph here, around 70% of Sri Lanka's cost of production of tea comes from the labor costs. In comparison, other tea producing countries, other black tea producing countries, specifically like India and China, India and Kenya, only have around 40 to 50% of their total cost of production being made up of labor. When you dig into the numbers of the labor costs of the Sri Lankan tea industry, you see that around 50 to 60% of the labor costs are made up of plucking costs, which should not come as a surprise because a lot of the plucking is very labor intensive because Ceylon tea is hand plucked. And 20% of the cost of labor comes from labor hours in field work, and then another 15% comes from labor hours in factory work. And the rest of the labor costs obviously come from miscellaneous labor activities. When it comes to the labor costs, what we found was that the labor costs are so high in Sri Lanka, not only because the daily wage that we pay our workers is substantially higher than in other black tea producing countries, but also the workers in Sri Lanka pluck less tea than what the pluckers pluck in other countries. Which means that we have very low efficiency as well. For instance, in Sri Lanka, we pay 1,000 rupee minimum daily wage, and the pluckers are only required to pluck 18 kilograms a day to earn this 1,000 rupee minimum daily wage. So they pluck 18 kilograms and receive this minimum wage, and this amounts to around 17 cents for a kilogram of plucked green leaf. In Kenya and India, which are both black tea producing countries, you find that the wage rate that the pluckers receive for plucking a kilogram of tea is less than half of that. So this is where the majority of the labor cost comes from, and therefore the majority of the total cost of production of Ceylon tea comes from. And what we found was that the attendance-based minimum wage, which was first introduced in 1995 when the management of regional plantation companies was privatized, is to blame for these high labor costs in the industry. The most recent increase in 2021 to the minimum wage increased it to 1,000 rupees a day, and also set the minimum requirement at 18 kilograms of green leaf, which means that they only have to pluck the 18 kilograms, like I said earlier, to get paid 1,000 rupees. And that is not the entirety of the story either, because the workers on Sri Lankan plantations also receive other benefits, like cash benefits in the form of bonuses, EPF, and leave, and non-cash benefits like housing, education, healthcare, childcare. The estates usually take care of these expenses on behalf of the on behalf of the workers, and this amounts to a total daily cost of around 1,750 rupees per worker at Sri Lankan tea estates a day. This wage model in particular doesn't have any incentives built into it to encourage productivity among the workers, because all you have to do is plug the 18 kilograms to receive the minimum daily wage. And that means that you have a lower daily plucking average, like I said earlier. Sometimes this lower plucking average in Sri Lanka is attributed to the high terrain of Sri Lankan estates, which is a reasonable argument. But when you really look into it, India, especially in Kerala and the Assam regions, have a similarly elevated terrain, but you still see the pluckers in those tea producing regions plucking substantially more than Sri Lankan workers. So it all boils down to the wage model that doesn't have any productivity incentives built into it. The wage model also doesn't incentivize high quality, because all you have to do is pluck the 18 kilograms. And if you pluck mature leaf and stalks, you still can basically sometimes pass it off. But in order to counter this, the estates have to use a lot of supervision, which again adds to the costs of the estates, and also creates a relationship of servitude between the estate workers and estates, or rather estate management, which again kind of plays into the master-slave relationship that you kind of think of when you think about the relationship between estate workers and estate management. So if all of these issues with the minimum wage exist, why is it so popular? So what we found was that it is actually a very simple way of granting estate workers a living wage, although you only earn 1,000 rupees a day, and if you multiply it by 22, assuming you do 22 days of work a month, you will earn 22,000. And what the organization called the Global Living Wage Coalition found was that in Sri Lanka, this amount is sufficient for these workers to have a bare bones existence. This doesn't mean that they live a life of luxury, but rather that it is essential. It is enough to cover their essential expenses. Also, given that there's a lot of other assistance that they receive from the estates in the form of non-cash benefits, like childcare and housing. And that is why politicians have usually resorted to this minimum wage model as a means of popular policy action. The election manifesto of Gotabaya Rajapaksa in 2019 billed the minimum wage increase to 1,000 rupees as a means of granting a good economy, quality housing, education, and healthcare facilities to the estate workers to lead a comfortable life. But when you dig deeply into the numbers, although you would at the surface level think that the the minimum wage model uh, is popular among the estate workers, you find that estate residents aren't actually necessarily happy with the way things are. If you look at the number of estate residents that are employed at the estates, the number has been going down in the last couple of decades, primarily because the minimum wage model, although it grants them a living wage, it also imposes an upper ceiling on the earning potential of workers. Because, like I said earlier, if you work 22 days, that means you earn 22,000 rupees. But the truth of the matter is, other industries that have moved into these areas over time, with the advancements that have been made in the economy, pay more for the same level of unskilled labor. So it has become a far more appealing choice for these workers to basically move out of the estates and take up employment in other industries. The minimum wage model therefore contributes to this labor out migration. And what that has meant for the industry is that the industry is now faced with a severe labor shortage because they can't find people to work in their states, and that has led to a lot of ramifications for the industry, as I will address a little later on. So it's important that we think of alternative wage models that both increase the work productivity and also enhances the earning potential of workers, while also giving their job more dignity. One of the biggest reasons for this labor out migration away from the estates is that even if the jobs they end up taking up outside the estates don't pay as much as estate work, they still perceive those jobs as more dignified as opposed to being an estate worker. So we need to think of ways to enhance the earning potential of workers as well as give the work that they perform as estate workers more dignity. And that is where the smallholder models come in, because the smallholders, with their more market-based remuneration strategies, have shown to be positive deviants in this case. So what a lot of people have proposed and what we also kind of endorse is the idea of the revenue share model, which would make smallholders of estate workers basically would assign a plot of land in the estates to each estate worker that they will be responsible for, that they will cultivate themselves with the help of the estate and then harvest. And then the workers will be paid based on the money that the tea that they grow earn at the Colombo auction, which means that there are not only productivity incentives built into the system, but also quality incentives, because unless you produce good quality tea, you wouldn't be paid good money. And unions have historically, of course, had reservations about these alternative wage models. That revenue share model is not the only way in which you can bring the small holder model into the plantations, but the unions have increasingly shown willingness to negotiate on this matter, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Minister Jeevan Thondaman has to say on this matter today as well. One estate that has kind of tested out this revenue share model is the New Denya estate, which found that their auction prices noticeably increased after taking up the revenue share model around 2015. And they also found that the earning potential of the workers substantially increased compared to the minimum wage model. While they were making around 25,000 under the minimum wage model, the estate workers, some of them were earning close to 100,000 rupees a day because the revenue share model doesn't impose the upper ceiling on their earning potential that the minimum wage model does. And they have also found that this is a somewhat of a reasonable solution to the labor shortage issues in the states, because the dignity issues in the profession are now kind of taken care of by this system, because this system doesn't require as much supervision, which means that the relationship of servitude that has traditionally existed between the estate management and the estate workforce um, can be left behind if we adopt this system. There are also other solutions that we can think of. One is to think of premiumization, which is to basically earn more money for the tea that we sell, and then in that way shift the cost burden to the consumer. And I will talk more about this in the second presentation, but also privatization is the magic word. Of course, it's not pragmatic to think that we'll be able to privatize the ownership of estates anytime soon, but the government has been talking about privatization of estate housing in the form of granting freehold deeds to estate workers, and this would go a long way in solving a lot of these labor issues and also helping these estate communities build wealth um, through land ownership. And the government has recently launched the Swarna Bhumi program as well as the Bharat Lanka 10,000 homes housing scheme. And I'm again looking forward to hearing more on these programs from the minister. And another thing that we have to think about when it comes to these issues is the issue of automation. Some people don't believe that Sri Lanka has the ability to automate plucking because it might impact the quality of Sri Lankan tea, given that Sri Lankan tea is produced based on orthodox methods. So there's no consensus in the industry, but I think more research is needed in this arena in particular. And the TRI, for instance, has a lot to do in that respect. And moving on to the land resources, the annual average yield of a tea bush declines noticeably after it reaches maturity. So in the upcountry, it's around 40 to 50 years, and low country around in the upcountry around 50 to 60 years, and the low country around 30 to 40 years that the tea bush reaches maturity. And once the tea bush reaches maturity, the annual average yield of the tea bush, which is in kilograms of made tea per hectare, begins to decline. So the older the tea bushes are, the more inefficient they become. And that also is one of the reasons why the cost of production in Sri Lanka is so high, because the annual recommended rate of replanting is 2.5%, and this is the recommendation by the Tea Research Institute. But what we have found in our research is that the rate of replanting is very low in Sri Lankan tea estates. And this has led to Sri Lanka having one of the lowest yields compared to other tea producing countries, especially the black tea producing countries on this list. India and Kenya have substantially higher yields than Sri Lanka. And this is one of the reasons why Sri Lanka has the highest cost of production among black tea producing countries. Partly the reason for this is the low return to economic activity, because even if the estates were to invest in replanting, they will not be able to break even by the time that replanting is due again at the current rate of plucking, because right now, because of the labor shortage at the estates, the plucking is done twice every month. But if you're able to do a plucking round every week, as is optimal for tea production, then you would find that, in fact, replanting would be a profitable endeavor to undertake. But because at the current rate of plucking, you can't turn a profit, we conduct a net present value analysis in the study to show that replanting at the current rate of plucking is not profitable at all. And that's one of the reasons why estates don't want to engage in it. And the other reason is the uncertainties over the appropriability of the returns, because the estates actually don't have outright ownership of the land. They are on a lease because the land ownership is with the government. And there are a lot of questions about the extension of these leases, and the estates would not want to undertake a very expensive endeavor such as replanting unless they are assured that they will be able to reap the benefits of such investments when the time comes. If they don't have a guarantee that they will be still holding the lease rights to these estates, then of course the topic of replanting becomes a non-starter. And there's also a lot of government failure in the industry because of the erratic policy decisions that the government has taken over the years. There's no confidence among a lot of planters that the government has the best interest of the industry at heart, which means that a lot of people don't actually think the industry has a future. So in that context, a lot of people don't want to invest in replanting either, and the low savings of a lot of the smallholders is another deterrent to replanting, particularly in the smallholder sector, because the smallholders actually don't have the capacity to wait 6 years until they can harvest again once they are done with the replanting, and not have any income in those 6 years, because a lot of the smallholders actually cultivate on average plots of land that are less than an acre. And because they don't have that capacity, they don't have the savings built up for that, you don't see any take up of replanting among smallholders. And a lot of the times, what has been proposed is to use scarce government funding to basically subsidize replanting. The tea export cess, which was originally meant to subsidize basically activities of the tea board, has now, half of it has been allocated to and the tea export sales was originally meant to subsidize replanting. And also you have the tea promotion and marketing levy, which is basically collected at a fund in the tea board and was originally meant to subsidize activities of the tea board. But half of that has been basically earmarked for replanting activities now. So there's a lot of money being offered to the industry for replanting. But the question is whether replanting is actually a public good, because in economic theory, subsidizing something only makes sense if it is a public good. But in the case of replanting, because it is neither excludable nor non-rivalrous, that means that replanting is not a public good, and therefore limited government funding is better spent on other things that are actual public goods in the industry, like the promotion of the generic Ceylon Tea brand, strengthening the regulatory framework of the industry, and research and development. So we believe that alternative wage models that would address the labor shortage at the estates and help make replanting more profitable would be a good solution in this case. And also maybe market-based funding mechanisms. Probably you can use the money from the tea marketing and promotion levy and to give out loans to smallholders and estates if they have issue finding the money for this. And also another helpful move would be to give assurances on the extension of the leases, and also basically raise awareness among smallholders, and have better coordination between government agencies that work with smallholders and smallholders to incentivize and encourage replanting among smallholders as well. That is the end of the first presentation, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the panelists have to say.
Thank you, Sudharika, for setting the tone for the rest of this evening. We will now be moving into our first panel discussion, and it's titled the same as the presentation, Land and Labour Reform, Efficiency Through Liberalisation. Our first panelist for this evening is the Honourable Jeevan Thondaman, who currently serves as the Minister of Water Supply and Estate Infrastructure Development for the Sri Lanka Podujana Perumana, or SLPP party. He has also previously served on the Committee on Public Petitions and the Ministerial Consultative Committee on Urban Development and Housing, among others. Welcome, Honourable Minister. Our second panelist, Dr. Roshan Rajadurai, is the Managing Director of the Kalani Valley, Talava Calais, and Horana Plantations of Hales. In addition to this, Dr. Roshan holds various other roles, including Chairman of the Planters Association of Ceylon. Welcome, Dr. Roshan. Finally, we are joined by Dr. Romesh Bandaranaike, CEO of EcoPower and former Director of the Plantation Management Monitoring Division for the State Ministry of Company Estate Reform, the same ministry which steered the privatization of the management of state-owned plantations in the 1990s. Welcome, Dr. Romesh. And as moderator for this panel, we have with us Mr. Murtaza Jafaji, who is our the chairman of the Advocata Institute. I would just like to let you know that while the discussion is going on, a QR code will appear on the screen. Please feel free to send in your questions by scanning this code. Now, before I hand it over to Mr. Murtaza, I'd like to turn your attention to the screen, because as Dr. Romesh was not able to join us in person today, he joins us virtually in conversation with Sudharika.
Hi everyone, we have with us today Dr. Romesh Bandaranaike, who was the former director of the Plantation Management monitoring division of the State Ministry of Company and State Reforms in the 1990s, who steered the process of the privatization of the management of government-owned plantations. Dr. Bandaranaike, thank you so much for being with us here today. To start off with, I was wondering if you could share with us what kind of thought process went into the privatization of the management of these estates, especially the formation of the regional plantation companies, and specifically if you could share us some insight into how you decided on the specific lease period for these estates.
Fine. Thank you, Sudharka. Let me try to put it very simply. At that time in the 1990s, the JDB and the SPC, the two plantation corporations, were the biggest spots of political patronage available in the country. Politicians, MPs, ministers, all were using those as their places to get people, their constituents' employment, contracts, transport contracts, so many other things, right? So actually, even trying to start a process of privatizing the plantation or privatizing the management would have been a non-starter. So we could not even refer to the question of doing, looking at privatization. So what happened was, I was involved. I was at a place called the Sri Lanka Business Development Center, and there was someone in the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Faiz Mohiddin, who was at a relatively low level, but he is a brilliant tactician. So he's the one who came up with the main idea, and the original consultancy, SLBDC, was given a consultancy to do a study on how to improve the operation of the JEDB and the SPC. That was all. There was not a word about privatization, management, nothing. That is how we started the process. So FICE had his different techniques and how to do this. To bring about policy change, you need, say, three different things. One is somebody's got to develop the policy. It needs to be a good policy. Secondly, you've got to build a consensus among all the people who have a serious say in this policy and who may, if they are not part of the original process, just stymie the process when you get to actual implementation. The third is, in a thing like the plantations, which is very politically sensitive, you needed to have the political will at the highest level to sometimes take political decisions which are not popular. Luckily for us, President Premadasa was the president at the time, and he had as his right-hand man Mr. Paskalingam, who was the Secretary of Treasury, but not just the Secretary of Treasury, the most powerful person in Sri Lanka, other than for Premadasa. And so we had that. But still, what do you do? So how do you move this? So FICE created, he got money, he could get money from anybody, international organizations, grant money to do studies, because he had a track record of seriously bring about policy change. So he got money, funny enough, it was from the Asia Foundation, and got ₹1 million, which was a lot of money at that time, to get a consulting study done on how to improve the JDB and SPC. That was all. Now, I was the team leader of the consultants. I hired a bunch of people. None of them were at SLBDC. I didn't know anything about tea or rubber per se, but I knew something about restructuring plantation organizations and all those things. So then we started the process of building a consensus. Now, how do you build a consensus among all the people? The first step to building a consensus, I know I'm giving a long answer, but without it, it doesn't mean anything. The first step to building a consensus is to get every room at the same time. If they are not willing to talk, then you can't even bring up the subject. Now, how do you do that? That is also Pfizer's technique, okay? What you do is you make them an offer that they can't refuse, okay? You set up a workshop in a 4-star hotel outside of Colombo, say starting from Friday evening till Sunday after breakfast. You invite all these people to come. They are not going to come. Then you invite their wives and children also, okay? So the first workshop also, all these key people, secretaries to ministries, the chairman of the JDB and SPC, the key JDB, SPC, directors, agriculture secretary, all these people, maybe 20 people with their families were all invited for a workshop, and the families didn't have to participate in the workshop. So we had the first workshop, and nothing much. The consultants had done about 3 months of work, where we had done case studies of 10 estates, varying estates, and nothing happened. So then 2 months later, the second workshop, same group of people were invited. And then what we were hoping happened I still remember it was Lincoln Pereira, who was the chairman of the JEDB at the time, who suddenly in the middle of all the discussion, how to improve the JEDB SPC, how to bring private sector management practices, he said, how can you bring private sector management practices into the plantation? We have to follow every government regulation. He exaggerated and said, even if I want to buy a pencil, I had to get 3 quotations. How can I ever do it? The only way for private sector management is for private sector people to manage the plantations. Okay? He brought it up. We were waiting for that. So the whole discussion of this whole study to improve the JEDB SPC became a different story. Other people stepped in, and that was the point at which even the subject of management contracts was even broached. So we took that and ran with that ball. The consultants changed the entire thing for how to do it. So we had number of thoughts, discussions. One of the first things was, how many things should we break it up into? Should the JEDB and the SPC be individual, just 2, or should there be many small ones? At one end, if you had the JEDB and the SPC, they were just too large. As far as private sector in Sri Lanka was concerned, they were not had the capacity to do it. On the other end, you didn't want to divide these 500 estates into lots of little 3 estate groups, because if you did, that was absolutely a recipe for political interference. Every politician would have their catchers take over 3 estates. We would not have been able to control it. So we had to come up with an in-between size, big enough to only let the big boys play, but small enough so they could afford it. Okay. So the initial one was not 22 RPC. We said, take there were 13 regional boards in JDB and SPC, divide them into 11, keep out 2. That's a particular reason I'll explain. Take the rest, and we will then form companies with the others. So we put this to the Economic Affairs Committee of the Cabinet, who came back and said, no, 11 groups too small, you need more. So we said, okay, how much? It was a negotiation. We said, okay, we can't reduce it much, increase it much beyond about 20, 22, because the plantation company will be too small, at which point all kinds of people will step in and say, I can do it. Then we decided 22. That the Cabinet subcommittee agreed. And that's how we went from there to the 22 companies. So it wasn't, this is the optimal size of plantation to get, for management or anything. This is what needed to be done to bring in private management. You understand? So we didn't have a clean slate on which we could draw the picture. That was the first step. Then it had to be only management, right? So we gave 5-year management contracts, right? And there were lots of things that went in between. Many hurdles that came up even within this. For example, originally the government agreed that you should allow foreign companies also to bid on this, okay? So, and local companies. So we pre-qualified. We asked for pre-qualification based on financial strength and experience. And we pre-qualified about 50 or 60 local companies and about 45 foreign companies, some big boys also we pre-qualified. Then the government got cold feet and said, no, you can't have foreign companies. So it was my job to write to the foreign companies and say, yeah, sorry, here's the $200 you paid for pre-qualification papers. We are giving it back to you. We are really sorry. But I used the opportunity. I sent every one of these foreign companies a list of the pre-qualified Sri Lankan companies with the names and contact details. On the other side, I sent to every one of the Sri Lankan pre-qualified companies a list of the foreign pre-qualified companies and their contact details. So in reality, even though foreign companies were left out, there were some people who joined together and provided inputs. There were so many steps we had to do. So that was when we brought in private management. And that was the first step. Then it was another whole step. I don't think we have time to go, but to go from private management, how do you go to the whole privatization? That also, I say it in the simplest way and how it happened without going into, the management contracts said, if there is a profit, the management companies each fielded about 3 or 4 people to key positions. Their salaries were paid. They were not given anything else, right? They managed it. All the accounts were done on behalf of the government company. Borrowing was done in the name of the government company because it was a 100% government-owned company, right? And mind you, it was not 53. There was a 99-year lease, okay, there at that time. And so you had that. I'm losing my, okay. Anyway, but if they got a profit, they got a share. If there was a loss, the loss was with the government, right? No private sector would have come in because these were loss-making things. So that was the rule. 5 years later, when Chandrika Bandaranaike became president, Premadasa had been assassinated. We, the very people who said this, now went and told a different story to the government, saying, I mean, this is crazy. Who signed a contract like this? If there's a profit, you get the share, private sector gets the share. If there's a loss, the government bears a loss. So we must have these companies bear a loss also, which was, in another way, I agree, they must buy shares. So it is a very much a yes minister arrangement, okay, where we have to start at point A and go to point B in a devious way. There were many, many steps in between. I don't have time to talk about it. I can talk for a day on it, the things we had to do. That's how these companies were formed.
Yeah.
And also, I said, one last thing, the 99 years before we went to the full privatization, again, we got a message from the government. No. 99 years was too much. You make it 49 years. So how did it become 53? Because 4 years had already gone by at that time. I chose to imagine the 49 as 49 on top of the 4. That's not what the cabinet said. They didn't make it clear. So that's why we got 53, a funny number like 53.
Yes. You mentioned that there were 2 companies that were set aside. I assume you're referring to the JDP and the SPC. I wanted to know your views on whether you think their management should also be privatized. You also now have El Khaduwa falling back on the hands of state management as well.
Okay. Well, first of all, I should tell you why they were left aside. They were not left aside for any reason. It's just that we allocated all the employees from the regional boards and the estates all to these 22 companies we formed. But there were 2,000 people in the head office of the JDB SPC, and we could not, no private sector would have wanted to take that headache. So we created a fiction saying there was about 50, we call them non-viable estates, which remained with the JDB SPC, and these so-called 2,000 people, it's a joke, who couldn't even manage the whole lot, was going to improve these before. Because if we had tried to include them at the beginning, the process would have collapsed. Again, did what we could. To answer your question, you're asking me that in 2017, when Ranil Wickremesinghe Jayapalane government was there, Mr. Pascaling was also there, I was on a committee. We put together a whole paper. There was I was on a committee, there was a subcommittee which I chaired, which had Indrajit Kumarasamy and Saman Kalekam on it. And there was a paper we did to privatize the rest, and a whole method, what to do with the employees, what to do with the areas, to take out the sensitive land. It went to cabinet, and there is cabinet approval in 2017 to privatize the rest of them in a somewhat different way, with all the details. I still have the papers. I don't have the cabinet paper, but I have the papers we wrote, which decided that. But what happened? You see, it was not like Premadasa and Pascalingam's day. When a decision was taken, it was taken and action was taken. And if people blocked it, action was taken against them. What happened here was these plantations at that time fell. I am prepared to give the name in Kabir Rashin's ministry. There is a cabinet decision taken. Nothing was done. Pascalingham himself, he didn't have the power he had under Premadasa. So nothing happened. Like many, many cabinet decisions have been taken under the Jayapalane government and other governments, and nothing happens. Not like in the days of Premadasa. So yes, I think we need to privatize the rest of them, and there are plans already written and approved. Okay. But it's not happening. 7 years ago.
Yes, because the topic of the extension of the existing leases also keeps coming up a lot. How do you think the government should approach this topic? And do you think there should just be a blanket extension, or do you think they should reconsider each and every lease based on the merits of the performance of each of the plantation companies?
You know, I don't know whether you are aware, but also under Jayapalane, before the Jayapalane government finished, there was a detailed evaluation done on the performance of the 22 plantation companies. I think I mentioned this to you before. You may have got a copy. I have a copy of the thing, right? I had to step back and say something else. It depends on, okay, what we did was we took all this land and gave it at a very low price to the private sector of Sri Lanka 30 years ago, okay? It was. But if you look at it from the financial point of view, it was a positive thing for the government, because they would be paying 5 billion rupees a year subsidy even today if they were not. Instead of which they are collecting maybe 2 billion and all that. That from that point of view. But from a different point of view, I am truly disappointed by the performance of all the plantation companies, even the ones that are profitable, because none of them, they got this cheap land, okay, absolutely cheap. We structure the finances to make it affordable. Otherwise, Most of the companies couldn't even afford it. I don't want to go into how we structure the finances with a lease rent which escalated and so on. With all that, what have they done, right? Okay, some people have made profit by putting oil palm, which is protected, and various things like that. But not a single company, right, has tried anything radical or anything like that, right? So, okay, I'm, how shall I put it? Of course, there's about 20 years more to go in the leases. I think it's very important the government should stick to the leases. The government should not, I have heard many discussions, oh, you haven't performed, I'm going to take it away. No, there are legal contracts, okay? They must adhere to the legal contract. But there, I feel that it shouldn't be automatic at all that any of these companies, right, should get an extension. If they want to get an extension, they better pay some serious money, okay? That's my view. I know many of the people who are running the plantation, some work with me. They will scream and shout that I say this, right? But what have they done for 25? Why do we now they are trying to diversify, grow cinnamon or coffee in large extents. There is no purpose putting 100 acres of something. Then you have got 10,000 hectares, right? So I don't know. I think tea, I'm not an expert on tea, so I know there'll be a dozen people in your workshop or whatever who know about tea who will object to what I might say. But it seems to me there is no labor to pluck tea in this country, and it can only get worse, okay? Right? So people have to start looking and specialize. Maybe some parts may grow tea, put it into other things. But I am not in a 20 years, you should just let it go, okay, for the next 10, 15. But when you get to 5 years before the end, I think it's time to say, okay, now we are not just going to extend the lease. You have got this cheap. You have already done so much. You pay some serious bucks to get this, okay? Or let somebody else come, honestly. Right? This is not at all what the people are saying out there, but that's my view.
Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, and we really enjoyed hearing your insight. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. All right, Sudhakar.
In the interest of time, I'm going to speed up the session because Roshan has to leave us by about 7:15, 7:20. If I can start first with you. Of course, Romesh Bandaranaike lived up to his reputations. He said it the way he wanted to say it. But let's start first. There are two issues on the land and the labor. Let's start with the labor issues. Roshan, can you compare and contrast between the performance of your different estates? Have you seen in some estates where labor practices are better, in some estates where labor practices are behind, and what could be some of the reasons for that?
Right. Thank you. I think that's a very tricky question to answer because as Mr. Bandaranaike said, our estates are positioned all over the country with different crops, inherently with different communities who are sort of who come with a different set of cultural and economic practices. So I cannot answer that and say some are doing better, some are doing worse. But what I can say is in the context of the plantation industry, each RPC has its own problems. While Mr. Bandaranaike has his own opinion, which I respect, we have to grapple with certain existential challenges now. As he said, one of the biggest problems that we have is workers. It's not that there are no workers, it's that the sort of perceptions about working on the estates have changed. We have to look at the history to take the whole matter into context. Maybe 100 years or 125 years back, this was the economic lifeline. But after the 1990s or more so after the 2000s, the economy has opened up. People have access to better education. And obviously the youth and people engaged in the industry have better aspirations. I don't think the industry is something unique. All over the world, even in developed countries, people who have been engaged in agriculture want to go away from this sort of repetitive agricultural work. So we realize that. That is why we always have promoted and consistently supported a different wage model, because the model that we are practicing is not suited for these times. We need to change and just quickly get into the subject. So we have introduced something called the revenue share model. There are many names, but eventually, finally, what we have done is to provide opportunities for the people who are willing to work and earn more. So it's flexi time, it's self-managed, and when you work in large gangs and groups, obviously it's a regimented, organized supervision has to take place. So we have broken away those shackles of, how shall he said, servitude, but those shackles of sort of a group work. and permitted people to work on their own speed. And that's the reason I can confidently say, having seen and firsthand countries like Kenya, they work sort of by themselves mostly, so they sort of pace their work depending on their capacity and their interest. So coming back again, different companies have different approaches to managing workers. Smart companies know that we can't push workers to come for work, we need to pull them. So we do certain HR, IR practices to attract them to come and work, because we understand tea is a labor-intensive industry. As he said, a traditional extent of tea, 1 hectare of tea requires about what we call 1,000, we call it still man days, 1,000 labor days to manage. But we do not have that number of labor. So what we do is we kind of liberalize the work systems, the work traditions, and permit them a lot of free rein. So that's how we have managed to overcome this very challenging situation. And keeping the industry alive and providing livelihoods, although 1 million people are resident and cared for, only 115,000 people work, and there is absolutely no compulsion for them to report for work. They are free agents. You can get up and say, I don't want to go for work. There's very little we can do. Compared with probably 50 years back, if you live on plantations, you are more or less compelled to come and report for work, which is happening in most parts of the world. So in short, different companies have different approaches and both different results.
Okay, thank you. So, Minister, first of all, thank you for coming here, and you are coming here not as a minister, as per your portfolio, but as the leader of the Ceylon Workers' Congress. So, just before you came, Sudharaka was presenting the facts, which is that 60% of the labor is plucking. And Roshan mentioned to me last week that it's about 2.5 pluckings a month, while you should be plucking 4 times. So the labor is constrained. And what Sudharaka showed is that according to our minimum wage, the target is 18 kilos. In Assam, they're plucking 34, South India 60, and in Kenya 60. So I don't think it is a human performance issue that is stifling their output, but it is an incentive issue that, you know, your target is 18 and you are paid a fixed wage. What is your viewpoint? Why we should stick with this minimum wage for plucking, for example, or can we go on a productivity-based system?
First of all, thank you for the Institute for having me, and I would like to apologize for coming a bit late as I was stuck with another meeting. But to answer your question, I think Sudharaka had also mentioned that unions are now more open to negotiating and they're more open to more progressive reforms now. Well, I can assure you, it's not the unions, it's Jeevan Thondaman. Okay. Right? I don't know about the others who are willing to shift from a daily wage system to an outgrower system. And I'll tell you quite frankly why it is, because the unions have a fear that a change in the daily wage model would more or less invalidate the union itself, the purpose of the union. But however, I think you need to take a step back and look at the situation. And in fact, my co-panelist is well aware of my stand. I have always been against this particular wage model. I have been against the wages board coming in. Unfortunately, the wages board, that is because our backs are against the wall. I have always been, in favor of a productivity and an attendance-based model. And that is what was in existence earlier. Unfortunately, due to lack of consensus, we were not able to take it forward. However, right now, there is no collective agreement in place. So when there's no collective agreement in place, there is a lack of regulation. Now, we saw alternative wage models such as outgrower or revenue share, and my stand has not changed. My stand is, I still believe an alternative wage model is required. However, whatever new wage model that comes in, there must be 2 things we must take into account. One is a transition is not overnight. It will take a bit of time, and it is not fair for the workers to be held back by a wage that does not reflect the cost of living today. So if there's a transition, I'm open to a transition. I'm open to changing the wage model. But the workers will require a transitionary wage for that. And that was my proposal in 2020 as well. And apart from that, the second matter is, whether it's the outgrow model or the revenue share model, whichever comes in, I believe for any field or any industry, it is of absolute importance to have a regulatory body. You cannot have a mechanism where company A is performing in one manner, company B is executing it in a different manner, because that will eventually lead to chaos. So my only condition in bringing forward and promoting a new model would be, one, there should be a transitionary wage, and second, there should also be a mechanism for regulations. That would be my...
So
and also, if I
normally,
could just,
Minister,
if
yes,
I could
go
just,
ahead. Yeah.
you mentioned that I came here in my capacity as leader of a union. You can call me Jeevan.
Okay,
You know, it's
and
fine.
thank you, Jeevan, and I will take you up with it. Generally, when a regulator operates, generally the regulator is to protect the consumer or protect the competition in the industry. Normally, the labor law of the country takes care of basically the contractual relationship between the employer and employee. And you yourself, I'm saying that you want to move away from the wages board. I believe the new draft of the labor law basically is a unified labor law, that it is not going to be based on your vocation, etc. So let me come back to that key thing that, the workers are going to earn a lot more. Sudaraka showed that example of one tea plucker earning like 80,000 or 90,000, while the minimum wage is 25 to 30,000. So if the incentives are so strong, even though the union leaders may be against it because of natural self-interest, they fear that they will be invalidated. What is holding it back?
So if I can, now though Sudaraka has shown an example of the income being more, I am not questioning that, I'm not arguing against it. Definitely the monetary component is far higher in an alternative model as opposed to the daily wage model. But I think, again, it goes back, see now you had mentioned regulations are for the end user. But however, for a mechanism which is coming into place, if there is no uniform methodology to it, then it will create confusion. I'll give you an example similar to that of Sudaraka's. Again, I do not want to mention the name of the company, but I'll be more than happy to share details of it with data. And it's none of the, it's not the Kalani Valley or Talawak or whatever. So there was one particular company which had gone forward with an alternative wage model. And when they had gone forward with an alternative wage model, the understanding between the company and the, I believe they call it revenue manager, was that they would provide the fertilizer and certain other matters, certain other components, and the revenue manager would be working and he would provide the team. Now that person, that particular revenue manager, was earning about 44,000 to 50,000, and we had the pay sheets. They were earning that much. But again, it could reflect on due to the decision by the government to ban chemical fertilizer. But when that took place, though the particular company had stock, they stopped providing chemical fertilizer to that particular revenue manager. That person's income dropped from 44 to 50,000. It dropped to about 7,000, 6 to 7,000. So again, it is not the fault of the company for actions taken by the government. I'll be very clear on that. But also, it should not be, that impact should not be felt by the revenue manager as well. There should be some sort of, protective circle. So that would be my issue. And apart from that, when it comes to, say, the outgrower or the revenue share model, there have been certain concerns that I've had, and in the interest of time, I'll just bring it out quickly. The concerns that I've had is, number one is, I believe that in certain contracts, EPF, ETF is not taken into account. And that had been one of my biggest concerns, because when you, and I have to admit this, because leading this community, we must accept the faults of the community as well. There is an issue with a lack of financial knowledge for this particular community. So when that issue is there and they are receiving a daily wage, the only thing they have to fall back on for their children's education or for housing or for anything else, which is not dependent on the government, is the EPF, ETF. And when that component is removed, you are essentially, depriving that person of a permanent solution, number one. And if I can also just say so, the companies have not said no to that. They said we can come to an arrangement and understanding, but discussions have not taken place due to the current situation. And apart from that, the second matter is we had always said that we wish that we want, under this revenue share model, if land is being given, a block is being given to, say, worker A, then it should not be given in terms of tea bushes. You can't say, here, take 200 tea bushes or 500 tea bushes. If you were to give it, say, in terms of, and I'm not asking for an exorbitant amount of land, there's 40,000 hectares unused. So say if it is provided as, say, 1 acre per working family, then not only will the tea bushes enable their productivity, but also the uncultivated land over there would allow some sort of, say, subsidiary income for them. So there are issues such as this, which we have brought up. And again, for each company, it differs. So it won't be right for me to comment on this on a generalized basis, but this would be my stand. Again, we're not opposed to a new model coming in. In fact, the 2003 collective agreement clearly stated that options to explore outgrower models will be taken up. And unfortunately, there has not been any leeway in that. So, yeah.
Roshan, you want to respond?
Yes, I'm very pleased that he's thinking very progressively. Thank you. But I want to assure you, I think you brought out some concerns about the conformance to accepted norms and practices and statute. You can be assured, because we all being PLCs subject to all the mandatory statutory and legal requirements. We are following and will continue to follow. And even the EPF, ETF, I don't think we're averse to that. It's just that the discussions have not started, and most of the companies would take that on board, because, as I mentioned earlier, it is in our interest to keep the industry running or industry sustainable, we need workers. So smart management will do things to attract them. So giving EPF, ETF, looking after the HR and IR issues are part and parcel of the whole management game. So I don't think we are on different roads there. We are also keen to provide the best benefits, the best, best stage for the workers to perform and enhance their earnings, because that will make them stay on the estates and build up their community, their family life. As to what we are seeing now, youth, I understand them. They don't want to do repetitive manual agriculture work. They are going. So in terms of what you suggested, land, I don't think anybody has said can't, but I certainly do agree there are different types of these revenue share models. But the current models, you know that there are at least 2.1 souls per family working. And it's flexi time. Now I see that workers working from 8:30 till 4:30, scratching around for 18. Because when you talk to the people who operate, I'm not naming companies, but there are companies where workers easily earn more than 50,000 rupees a month consistently. And when you talk to them, they say it's a good system. We can go early. If they don't have any commitment with children, they go early before sunup. By 12:30, they plug the requirement, and they have time to spend for themselves, with their families, with children, and in case, like if they have to go for a, say, school, a PT or something, earlier in our regimented system, it has to be done. Either you report for work at a particular time and you can't just walk in, but here they can come at 10 o'clock and they start plugging and earn the day's keep. So I think it's a win-win. And we also gain, because areas, as he mentioned, that we cannot plug intensively, a minimum of 4 rounds we need to plug, and when they plug, the quality of the tea produced from that will improve, then of course a higher rate of return will go to the workers. So these are very progressive thing. It's just that meeting of two minds have not taken place yet, and I hope that in the future that both parties who have the same interest, community interest is there, industry interest is there, because in our areas, particularly in rural areas, in the high ground, what other industries there? Otherwise the workers, I have seen that they go to rural area, very hard work. They go early morning at 6:30. Obviously, they get a higher cash wage, and they come back by 6:30 in the evening completely exhausted because they have to work. So they can work in comfort, in ease, when you step out in the plantation sector or in the workplace. So I think it's a win-win, and the people will win, the industry will win, and I think overall I have, from the experience, personal experience, contented, happy, and earnings, the quality of life has improved. I think they showed some estates. 80,000 may be an exception right along the year, but definitely more than 40, 50,000 per person. And men have the option of working what we call double name and earning twice. So this is a good time to move away from this age old, because I do not think that we can continue till we crash.
So Roshan, I started out asking you whether there are differences in performance across the states. Do you have a lot of inter-estate labor migration?
Yes, now that's a very good thing, because now the labor market has got freed up. because of this revenue share model, some estates offer better attractions in terms of transport, food, rates. So within the region, people pick and select and go to particular estates that they find more favorable and where they have better opportunities to earn, probably because the yield and the conditions are better. So it is in a way negative for us because now it's open market and the worker can provide these services to the highest bidder. They do not have to be confined to a particular estate. Go back 20, 30 years ago, because we would not take anyone outside from another estate. So now the workers are, as I told you, free agents. They can pick and choose where they go to work, and there is another industry where they move around and go to the estate that pay the highest daily earnings.
Now, majority of Sri Lanka's tea production, is it 65 or 70%, is coming from the low growns,
yes,
right? Where they don't have any of these restrictions. Yes. Now, I asked when Sudarka was doing this, I said, go and study that, whether the productivity issue, could you comment about the performance of the low country small producers?
I will. Actually, 75% of our green leaf production comes from the smallholder sector. They cultivate about close to 70% of the total land area under tea. They have about 500,000 operators, as we call, the people who pluck, apart from the other people involved in the supply chain, whereas we have 115,000 registered workers, tea, rubber, and other crops. So the special feature in the low-grown sector is the small size of their holdings. Its average is only 60 perches. That's just sufficient for a day's work. And 80% of the smallholder lands are under 1 acre. So basically what I'm saying is they cannot have continuity of work. So you go and work today, and contrary to popular belief, their productivity is lower than ours is, right? The actual figures now.
So is that productivity low because they don't have enough work to do?
No, it is low. One thing is where the estates are located is in the low country. There is high wear and tear with the climate change, temperature, there's more vacancy, and the intensity of plucking is reduced. Instead of plucking 4 rounds, when you pluck twice, the physiology of the tea bush doesn't permit high crop growth. So there are other external factors that cause low production. What I was trying to say is that the low country, about 50 to 60% now are hired workers. Maybe 30, 40 years ago when they started the low country movement, smallholder, it was their own land that they harvested. Now those parents have educated their children, have better aspirations, so now they hire work. So they work in one place. Tomorrow they have to go, maybe they have a pre-organized place, or they have to go in search for work in other places. So it's really a challenging situation, and much of these people do not have the required technical and logistical support, particularly at a time when there was no fertilizer. They were left helpless. So there are challenges in the low-grown sector as well, and as a result, you can see our national crop is coming down and a lot of other issues. But basically, the two sectors are different. Whereas in our sector, still because it's a corporate sector, it's a large estate sector, they have the other facilities and benefits that the companies, the government, and the interested agencies are providing. So they are much better cared for. We have a popular saying that from birth to death, they are cared for in terms of children.
So if I can stop you there and lead up to another question I want to ask Jeevan. Now you said there are 1 million people, of which only 115,000 work for the estate. Yes. I think Sudaraka was also showing those some of the statistics. And the estate has to provide basic services to these people, irrespective of whether they work for the estate or not.
It's like this. Now, up till 1992, estates belong to the government, and therefore the houses belong to the government. In 1992, it was mandatory for us at the time of privatization that we let go of the housing that they already used, that they lived in, and the vegetable land they cultivated to a government-formed organization, always headed by a minister from their party. I think his grandfather, Mr. Jeevan Thondaman, was the first president. So all the quality of life improvement, HR-related matters are funneled through that. Early it was called Plantation Housing Development or something. Now it's Plantation Human Trust. So basically, they were taken away from us, and the workers who are in those houses, they continue to live we don't send them off, we don't have legal provisions, and they continue, even though they work on the estate or they continue work, and general facilities and amenities provided to the community is provided to them. I mean, you can't exclude, you can't say you're not a worker, you won't get it. Generally, they enjoy it because it's a community. Even during the COVID, I must emphasize, during COVID time, when we vaccinated the plantation sector 3 times, I think we had ample liberal assistance from PHTT. We looked after the whole community. Our managers organize food, our managers organize a vaccination. So there is no distinction saying that you are a worker, non-worker. But in the case of work and the benefits arising out of work, obviously goes to the workers.
So, Jeevan, do you want to comment on that? I mean, for historical reasons, they were like indentured labor, they ended up living in the estate. Now they continue to live in that same geography, but don't work for the estate.
So if I could just, one is I must respectfully disagree with you. I will come back to as to why I disagree. But I think Sri Lanka has a very big issue, and that issue is Sri Lankans, with all due respect, are ignorant. They're ignorant to the situations of communities that are not their own. And that is why we are more or less in this particular state right now. For example, not many people are aware of the fact that the hill country Tamil community were more or less disenfranchised, not just till 1977, till 2009. And apart from that, not many people know that they were human trafficked between 2 governments from 1964 to 1981. So despite all this, there has been work done. And one point of disagreement is it wasn't just people from my party who were in power. I must say there was also Mr. Chandrasekharan, there was also Mr. C.B. Ratnayaka, there was also Mr. Naveen Dissanayake. So there were people from different communities also in charge of this particular section. But what I want to be very clear on is, though there are different perspectives on the informal sector within the estate, one thing is, what is factually accurate is the fact that people who are not estate workers are labeled as outsiders by the RPCs. This is a fact. And the reason I am saying this is because the evidence is very clearly out there, which is why we had to speak for this land rights matter. Now, for example, when the Indian housing came, the first criteria was it can only be given to plantation workers. Now that has been changed. And similarly, if there is any particular benefit that a worker would be deriving from the government, it will not apply to their extended families. And one issue that we deal with on a daily basis is that one thing that is older than the unions, than the RPCs, than all these other entities are the line rooms. The line rooms have been in existence for a very long time. Now, would it be fair for someone whose grandfather was born and brought up in that line room, whose father was born and brought up in that line room, and now that person is being born and brought up in the line room, let's say he chooses not to work in the estate, then he can be evicted. And again, this is not my view. If you can put I'm sure there are civil organizations here. If you were to put a right to information to the PMMD, you would get the exact number on how many people were evicted. So again, the reason for the eviction being that they are a non-worker / an outsider. And other than that, most of the provisions in the PHTT, they so far have been applied only to the estate working community. It's, however, now it's being changed. So I cannot agree with that statement that if the outsiders are being catered to. Something as small as a child development care center, a crèche, a CDC, if I'm not mistaken, if you are the child of a worker, you can go into the child development care center. But if you're the child of a non-worker, either you're not allowed or you have to make a payment and then send them inside. So again, I'm not trying to point fingers here, because one thing that I have noticed with the RPCs, much like the unions, is that usually there is a very big disconnect. There is there's lack of, awareness between what's happening there and what is actually being portrayed here. So this argument, I think we've always had on a regular basis, so with all good interest, of course. The intention is definitely there to help out everyone, but we have to understand there's 115,000 registered workers, and there's roughly about 30 to 40,000 cash workers, temporary workers. And the rest and all, at the end of the day, some of them will be working in hotels, some of them, I can give you, there are children from estates in Hatton, 4 of them are working in NASA right now. So it's not that they are only sitting in pillows and doing Kottu and all that nonsense. There's a Court of Appeal judge. There are various other people who have excelled in their field. But the problem is the current population that is residing within the estates, if the basic recognition of their existence is not going to be given to them, then that is the biggest injustice you can do to them, regardless of who you are.
Okay. May I open it out for any questions? There is the issue about land leases, Roshan, that we will come back if we have time. But let's give the audience time, an opportunity.
Sorry, before that, could I just answer what Sudharaka wanted to know regarding the land rights matter?
Yes, go ahead.
So I'll just make it really quick. So with relation to rights to ownership of land, it has been a long-standing demand. Again, one thing that everyone must keep in mind without any bias is that this is not charity, it's not a handout. These are more or less reparations for 200 years of historical injustices meted out to this community. So with relation to that, I think one thing that everyone must take into account is in any country, when there's a vulnerable and marginalized community, and the evidence is right there, so all you have to do is look it up. Just because I don't present the evidence doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We're living in the information era, I'm sure everyone can look it up. In any country, the marginalized and vulnerable, the first step for integration is to provide them with rights to ownership of land. And if they did have rights to ownership over their land, they wouldn't have suffered through the food crisis as much. And apart from that, they do not have a financial base to begin their lives from. So that would be the justification for that. And we are asked for 10 purchases of land per family. There's totally 251,000 families that are residing within the estate sector. Out of 251,000 families, 44,000 families government has built houses for from 1972 till today, and over different ministers, different periods. And none of them have a deed, by the way. And apart from that, 22,000 families had built their house on their own money. So roughly about 170 to 190,000 families, give or take, we'll know after the census, are basically facing a housing and land issue. So when I took over the ministry, I was capable of, I had the 10,000 houses from India. Apart from that, before the economic crisis, I could build up to 2,000 houses a year. And then when COVID set in, that 2,000, the number reduced to 1,000 houses a year. And now with the economic crisis and the aftermath of it, since now we're on a road to recovery, this is what you should judge the cost by. With the current allocation, I can build 150 houses a year. Now, if I have to build 150 houses a year for 170,000 families, you can all do the math that it is an impossible task. And also one more thing that has to be noted is certain families living in the estate sector, I'm sorry I'm taking a bit of time, but it's an important matter. Certain families in the estate sector who have received housing, some of them have sold it and gone back into the line room. Because that just shows just giving a house is not a solution. You have to provide the economic strength to maintain that house, to sustain that house. So that's why we have come up with a sustainability plan as well. And we felt today in the line rooms, one thing is for certain is we are in requirement of about 35,699 toilets, bare minimum. And that's how this idea came in to begin with. When an estate worker when someone residing in the estate, when the native of that estate tries to build a toilet adjoining their line room, they are not allowed. The police come and take action on them. Why? Because it is not their property. And this is in relation with the RPCs, but in the case of private estates, it's far worse. In Kurunagala, I think everyone on social media, it went quite viral that there were 50 families that were struggling without houses. And we came under fire for not building houses for them. But what people didn't realize is, legally, we cannot build houses for them. So there are many intricacies within.
I think that's understood.
Right.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions on either the labor productivity, the labor model on land? Yes. Maybe.
I perhaps am the only person in this room that has joined the industry in 1953. I've been around since 1953. I've been through the time of the British. I've been through the time of nationalization, and I've been through the time of reprivatization. Right, I've seen this entire thing now going on. Now, the question I'd like to ask you is, now you are having less people to work tea. Now, what is the reason why you do not want to get into oil palm? What is the reason why you do not want to get into coffee? What is the reason you do not want to get into cinnamon and make the productive labor workforce more productive in these crops? That's point number one. Now, the next point is, having been around from the time that we had about 158,000 line rooms, and also the time that the Plantation Trust was funded by the Dutch government, we moved into self-help housing. Now, is it that self-help housing was a bad thing, or was it a good thing? If it was a bad thing, how bad was it? And if it was a good thing, how good is it? Those questions, please.
Okay, thank you. We'll take any other questions. Yes, you have a question.
I just want to ask whether are we comparing apples with apples? We are talking about the labor productivity of Kenya, or as I am saying that per person we are plucking so much and whatnot. I have 2 points. One, how much anyone can pluck. You can only pluck as much as you have on the bush. Do we have enough leaf on the bush? That is one side of the story. Second side of the story is that how much tea we want to supply to the world as Sri Lanka. What are we striving for? To do that, how much land we have to allocate? And if so, what are we going to do with the other land? Can we amalgamate land? If you are replanting, are we replanting whatever we replanting? Are we replanting correct? That means how much of Sri Lankan tea estates, some of the fields we know, we need a scooter to go from bush to bush. Is it productivity? That's the question I'm asking.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I can't take any more questions because Roshan has to go.
I can.
So there were 4 questions. So let's take his question about the...
I'll answer about the land.
Yeah.
Yes. There was a question about basically about diversification into oil palm and other crops. I must assure you that there is a rapid move to diversification, not for any other reason. As someone said, some of the lands which are in TR 150 years, over the period of time, because of the ravages of weather, excessive rainfall, soil degradation for natural reasons, some of those lands are not economical to be maintained in tea. So consequently, the vacancies, and those have been put to good use in terms of oil palm, cinnamon, rubber, diversification. We are constrained by government policy. Actually, some of the rubber lands that were suitable for rubber long years back are no longer suitable because of excessive rain. And we are not clearing virgin jungle. Those lands need to be cultivated in an alternate crop, ideally oil palm, because it's the most suitable crop. Then companies have already started to diversify to coffee because the same reasons that give the taste and the quality flavor for Ceylon tea support the coffee beverage as well. So companies have gone for cinnamon, and there is diversification going at a rapid pace, except that government policies and other impediments prevent us. For example, if I tell you that we have to get permission from the RRI to uproot rubber trees. Naturally, they would not give permission because it is not in their interest. So there are things like that that is preventing the rapid pace of privatization. And one necessity that drives privatization, as I told earlier, is a lack of available hands or workers for intensive cultivation like tea. Secondly, he asked, yes, I don't know whether we should accelerate our production to such a level that, like Kenya, I can easily answer your question that generally, I mean, there are exceptions to the rule, there is enough crop on the bush to pluck because, as I explained earlier, naturally the tea bush has to be plucked for average 4 rounds a month. At the start of privatization, we had about 327,000 workers. Now it has come down to about 115,000. So we cannot pluck the 4 rounds. That is one of the reasons why our productivity is low. If we had the sufficient labor now, they can pluck a little more and our national productivity will go up. And because of the intensity of plucking, the leaf grows and there's enough crop for the people who are interested to pluck. And there is enough evidence. I'm not saying hearsay. If you look at that, our averages are 30, 35. That is an incentive because when you change the work model, every kilo they pluck, they feel that a majority or the larger portion of the gain comes to the workers. So that's the pull of this revenue share model. In terms of allocating land for tea, allocating whether we should get away from tea, those are decisions individual companies have to take in consideration of where their geographical disposition is, their product and the demand for the product and the availability of workers and especially other external factors.
I think he had 2 questions about the housing.
So with relation to self-help housing, I'm of the view that at the end of the day, an owner-driven model is the best way to move forward. But the problem is a self-help house, as I mentioned, there's about 22,000 till now. The problem is there is no point in there being a house if there is, no, number one, no deed for that particular house, that land in which they are staying in. And number two, if they do not have, as I mentioned earlier, the economic strength to sustain that house, then it really proves pointless. Because when we, before we decided to go on this rights to ownership of land agenda, we had random surveys done with a sample size of about, I think, 1,000 to 1,500. And we carried out about 4 to 5 of these surveys. And one thing that we did notice is, one, there is an issue with mentality where they believe in this dependency model, where they believe that we do need grant houses, we do need assisted houses, which any person below the poverty line in Sri Lanka absolutely needs, no doubt about that. But at the same time, those who do wish to go into that self-help houses, those owner-driven models, they need to make sure they have the opportunities for that. And also the consequences what follow after, they need to be well protected. So that would be my opinion on the matter. But, and...
Do you have anything to say on that, Roshan?
Housing, I think this land matter has been a point of discussion for some time. The land belongs to the government. We are only lessees. So that's a political and a national level policy matter that people beyond our level must take.
If I may just comment on that, I mean, again, this it just goes back to the disconnect because to you, Mr. Roshan, we've had discussions in multiple platforms, and I understand in terms of CSR how far you have gone beyond and above and beyond for the community. But I think when it comes to the grassroots level, unfortunately, that intention is not reflected, not because of anything. And again, I'm not pointing fingers at any particular company. This is just an overall view on the subject with whatever issues we've dealt with. One of the main issues that we have dealt with is as far as the RPCs go, they are very protective over their land. And that is not in any bad intention. So please, anyone don't misinterpret it. Because like he said, they are the lessees and they are responsible for the land that was given to them. They are obviously concerned about it. But the reality of the matter is, I think there are issues pertaining to land and the person the land is being given to. And the government has taken a decision and we've allocated 4,000 million rupees, which has given us a soft cushion for about 200,000 families. So in order to execute that, the RPCs will also have to cooperate with us in this manner.
So, Roshan, then my final question is what Sudharaka brought out and what Romesh said. So basically, the economic yielding part of a tea bush is 20 to 40 years?
Not necessarily. Normally in the upcountry, given the climatic conditions, 60 years if you husband it well and if you manage it.
But it peaks at about 20 years?
In the low growns, it peaks at about 20 to 30 years. In the high growns, 50 to 60 years.
Okay. So the leases, and there's a long payback period because of the low yield, because of the plucking. So the leases have a lifetime that is much less than the economically productive age of a bush. So what do you want to do with the land? How should we solve this problem?
Right. Thank you for asking that question. I think this will be the last question I can answer. But can I take you completely out of the question that you asked me? I mean, I've been very open about it. The producing community, that is the whole structure, management, staff, workers, everything, I believe that we do a lot of work, lot of effort, everybody does it, and produces a kilo of tea which we sell at the auction at $3.50. And if you go to any supermarket overseas, that same kilo of tea in different forms is sold in different forms well over $100. But all the time that the producing or the companies or whatever you call it, the burden, the fingers are pointed at that sort of producer sector. But even the certification bodies, even the NGOs, INGOs, everybody is looking at the producer sector, the sector that provides livelihoods, sector that provides jobs at some sort of a livelihood, whatever the level of standard is. But why isn't the global community putting pressure on the supermarkets? We know from research that more than 40% of the profit is retained by the retailers. Yeah. Producer gets almost so less than a percent. Why isn't pressure put on? Because if we get a higher price, naturally for the reasons that I explained earlier, we want to keep the industry, pull people, we'll be able to pay a better price than we are paying today. So that is something that a lot of people ignore.
Yeah, that will be covered in the second panel. But quickly, because I didn't get an answer, that the fact that the economic life of the bush is longer than the rest of the lease, is it a deterrent for replanting?
Yes, because main deterrent is not economics, its main deterrent is availability of workers.
Okay.
Economics we can work out if there's a positive contribution because we don't plant the whole estate at once. Right. We may go in for replanting depending on the availability of workers.
Okay.
That is the short form.
Could I just comment on that? You see, I mean, as Mr. Roshan rightly said, 60 years is what was mentioned. And as Mr. Romesh said, the lease in the beginning was given for 53 years. So those who took the lease knew very well that, you know, the maturity of a plant or, you know, you would be, that is far more than the leasehold. Yeah, so the economies can be worked on later. But one thing that I want to address, considering that I think this might be the last bit, but again and again, one thing I've noticed in this platform is that, you know, we're talking about labor shortage constantly. And the thing is, labor shortage exists not because of the labor, because of the environment surrounding the labor. And again, not pointing fingers, but I think certain harsh realities must be accepted. For example, I think everyone would be in agreement with me when I say that majority of the tea pluckers are women, correct? A solid majority. They work in the field for what, 8 to 10 hours, right? Simple question, where do they use the toilet? Simple question.
In the bush?
I'll answer.
Yes.
Okay. No, one second, Mr. Roshan, let me just complete. The reality of the matter is, if we are not able to give a woman a bathroom for a place where she has labor-intensive work for continuous period of 8 to 10 hours, then I think we need to look where the problem is. And we can't, again, point a finger at the government and say that, no, government hasn't built toilets, because if the government has to build toilets for the employees of an RPC, then the government has to start building toilets for employees of all the private sector employers. So now, I think one more thing, and also if someone's asking what we have done about it, when I took over as State Minister for State Infrastructure in 2020, we started a field room project. And that particular field room project was funded 100% by the government. We have 40 pilot field rooms. And we have done a survey after that. It has increased productivity, and also it has had a positive social impact.
Okay.
That's all I would like to say.
So on that note, Roshan.
I'll clarify something I think I need to. I think anyone listening, workers come for work at 8:30. And then they go home for lunch. They have a lunch break of 2 hours. So they go home to their own places of residence, and we finish work, 8 hours work, 4:30, 5:30. That's their work day. And we have, companies have also built workers' restrooms. And I know companies that have built workers' toilets in each field. So that kind of awareness has come in now. And companies are taking positive, progressive steps to provide facilities to the workers. But it is not right to say that they are in the field for 10 hours at a stretch. They have option, yes. And if they want, usually the culture, the practices, Kanganis, the other direct supervisors, they permit them to go home.
Okay.
I'm just confused about one matter. I'm just confused about one small matter, because I was quite patient till now. Mr. Roshan, you just mentioned along the course of this panel that, for a question that he had asked, that interplantation migration does take place. They can go to another estate and work. So let's say one worker goes from Talawakala and works in Norwood. They can't come back home to go to the bathroom. Then what?
Absolutely correct.
So that is my problem.
So, of course,
they can't go to maybe they'll go to the house of a worker over there.
Okay. I mean, that's understood, right? I'm talking about the workers who are living and working on the estate, and it is their choice. They go, then I'm sure they must be finding some means. Yeah.
I think, Roshan, you have to report to your boss, and he has a flight to catch. Okay. So on that note, we are going to finish this panel.
Thank you, yes.
And the next panel can start. We have exceeded our time by 9 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great that we have a minister who says, call me Jeevan and not Honorable Jeevan. And we follow you on social media and your recent things. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much, Roshan, for all the insights and all the help you gave Sudharakar to bring about this report.
Thank you. Thank you. See you there. Thank you.